Hello and welcome to the Kevin the Great Witness, the Adventure Series Is show. I'm Dean Bell here with Jeremy and the Great Witness, Kevin. Dean Kevin from the UK, and he will be sharing some cool experiences today, and we'll be commenting on them and asking questions. So let's see what you have today, Kevin. Hi.
In this real side experience, I would find myself in a house. It wasn't my house, however, so wasn't a representation of my personal self and its created consciousness, as the recreated physical level houses on the real side generally are. I was in the company of a small group, and my personal self was unable to recognize who they were. Undoubtedly, the real awareness, with its overview of all things creational, would have known, but that I received no impressions from the real awareness regarding their identity, nor did I consider through my personal self or request these impressions, suggested this wasn't a detail especially important, or that perhaps my personal self did recognize them, but that it didn't consider the recognition it had of them, much like on the physical, when we are in the company of those we know. How much time do we consider over the fact that we know them? And only then, on waking, did I ponder over their identities. But the only impression was that they were individuals becoming more aware, and naturally enough, they would be featuring in my real side experiences, as those with the same real intent will have converging experiences that reflect this intent as we go through the process of creation and share and promote the ease. A process individually with how we have decided to go through the process, yes, but also a focus on the galactic assignments and operations, which ought have then all those agreeing to participate, sharing the same or similar real side experiences to this end, and supporting each other as we do. For as I have shared my experiences, generally I am with a group, and of varying size, but likely to be featuring the same individuals. And of course, for all those we visually see in the experiences, how many are there that are involved that we don't, with all those operating on other levels of life? And although our real awareness can perceive them all, it would be somewhat overwhelming to reveal to the personal self all that are with us on assignment throughout the multi-dimensional simulator. I have had real side experiences before, where the personal self received too much of what was going on multi-dimensionally, and it rather was like being bombarded with millions of movies at once, and difficult then to pick apart and determine specific details. But with those kind of experiences, perhaps the details are not important for the personal self, more just the grasping of an overall theme, and that the experiences are vastly sped up just to get through more of the process more swiftly. Anyway, there was one individual in this real side experience that I did recognize, and that was my Auntie Wendy from the physical level. She has no interest in becoming more aware at this time, very much personal self-orientated and creationally physical astral focused, but on a few occasions on the real side she has presented herself in keeping with one who very much was not only on her awareness process, but had a strong recognition and standing with the ears, as she would have that unmistakable impression about her that only real guides, Dwayne and Ava, have. As such, on those occasions, I would surmise she was a real guide assuming that form. The real guides generally assume the forms of my deceased grandparents, and this I determine again through my real awareness impression of their standing real with the ears signatures. But on the odd occasion a guide will take on the form of my Auntie Wendy. And yes, the dark forces can try a little mimicry and shape-shifting deception of their own, but they will lack this sincere standing real and shining with the intensity of the ears sense about them. And so here Auntie Wendy was again present and in this house with this small group and I, and perhaps this was even the personal self recreated house of one of these other individuals, that we all had agreement and permission to then enter, agreement to feature in whoever's house this was, to feature in their experience, in other words. The real guide, in Wendy's form, was speaking with us about a great many things, but specifically it was in regards to dark force technology that they had and were perhaps intending to utilize on the physical level, and technology that would not be beneficial or make sense with life, but more for the purposes of their control and the maintenance of it. The guide drew our attention to a television in the corner of the room, and this was the source of the delivery system for this technology, seemingly, as everything is rather interconnected with everything else, technology-wise, and all utilizing distorted, lethal frequencies, this perhaps suggesting not necessarily just the televisions then, as a potential delivery system for something untoward, but maybe implying anything technological may serve the same purpose. For as she switched on the television, curious frequency beams would emit from it, that perhaps would actually be taking place on the physical, but not necessarily that the human senses could perceive. And here it was maybe that only our real awareness could discern the distortion. could see these frequency beams on the real side. It would make sense from the dark forces perspective that people don't see these beams, and so it's likely that just like the 5G, the Wi-Fi, these beams operate on frequency levels the human eye can't decode, outside of the only frequency band we can see through the physical senses, that of visible light. What followed then was the seeming manifestation of bugs and insects that erupted as though from the ethers. No point of origin, they were just there, and crawling all over the furniture and ourselves. The guide assured us, however, that these were holograms, broadcasted from the television, and although the curious frequency beamers would be imperceptible to the human eye on the physical level, the holograms would be plainly visible. So who knows what holograms the dark forces may decide to project, and if they are limited only to the televisions as the delivery system. I had the impression that they could just as readily be beamed from computer screens or cell phones. Perhaps the holograms may be catered to each individual, whatever is necessary to get whatever reaction or response the dark forces desire, with fear as their currency, for it is fear that keeps people locked into their personal selves and cause and effect creation as readily as any other clung to emotion of the astral body. But fear is a particular, in that people will seek to have fear alleviated, and the dark forces will always present situations that cause fear with the masses, then can offer their solutions to alleviate that which they had covertly created, which usually results in agreement then to more stringent control measures, as David Icke puts it, problem, reaction, solution. But it's very feasible that these holograms just as easily could take the form of spiritual peoples, of saviours, Jesus, of aliens, and even on a far grander scale, as it has been suggested, the possibility of a faked alien invasion, Project Bluebeam, but where the spaceships filling our skies are nothing more than holographic. Whatever is required to keep the masses agreeing with restriction, to chase, have affirmed, and bolster their created spiritual belief ideas, and to have them continuing to agree to the ideas of saviours that will return to save them, or to run in fear due to an apparent invasion, all designed to cast as wide a net as possible, to keep everyone in agreement with restricted ideas that keep them in creation as supporting slaves to the controllers. But the nature of what we were shown was that which would very much induce fear, I should say. So it suggested this was maybe the specific variety of holograms they might employ. For these insects were of a variety that would be very poisonous. Black widow spiders, scorpions, those foot-long centipedes, etc. Additionally, these holograms were far more advanced than your typical hologram, for generally, as real as a hologram appears, it is just that, and you can pass your hand through it, and of course, a hologram of that type can do you no harm, despite its possible alarming appearance. Everything in creation is holographic, which is a physical senses decoded projection from a specific base frequency field. With the physical body, we have a unique frequency field based on the decided construction ideas of the created consciousness that have manifested the body forms as the effect of what has been decided up until this moment. The body forms we decode through the senses of the physical body. But with the holograms in the simulation, we have polarity differentials that present as solidity or lack of it. The closer the polarity of these frequency fields, the more they repel each other, like two positive charged magnets as an example, and this presents as seeming solidity. Water, then, as an example, is of a polarity that doesn't present as much resistance, polarity-wise, to the physical body, hence why we can walk through it. And so, these holographic insects we could not only see, but we could feel, we could pick up and move, and theoretically then they could bite and sting, for these holograms were just as any body vehicle hologram in creation would be. They were of an electromagnetic polarity that they would seem as solid, and in fact were then as viable a body form as any for awareness, assuming they were designed to have all the necessary internal mechanisms. But my impression was that these were more empty shells, as it were, but still controlled from some external source, and very possibly could be made to attack, to sting and bite, and deliver poisons and venoms if the insects had them included. And then the guide would turn off the television, and the insects would vanish as suddenly as they had appeared. So it seems this is another technology of the dark forces they may be bringing to bear for all the various reasons they would, overall, for the purposes of control and agreement to restriction. We know of their hologram technology and the likelihood of their use of it, and indeed they do use holograms and have been using them all along, on the physical and the real side. But so realistic are they that most wouldn't notice unless you happened to walk through one. But now a new element, that of solid holograms, and as this real side experience revealed, the possibility of beaming anything they want into homes through the technology of the televisions, computers, etc. And these holograms with their solidity, would be indistinguishable from the real thing, from the usual holographic body forms of the simulation at any rate. So a heads-up real side experience and a warning that what you might see may be these dark force holograms. And what if they should beam holograms of those we know, our friends, relatives, new friends, or the guides, into our presence, and have them operating in a way that causes derision and disruption among the new friends? For on the real side, the real awareness can discern the fakes and the mimicry through its overview discernment and its ability to read intent. But on the physical, we are resigned more to the surface world of illusions. Our awareness locked into the physical body on awaking, and its perception of the physical level. But our real awareness is everything, and everywhere, and on the physical too. So for those becoming more aware, they should still have the impressions of the ill intent of anyone in their midst, or any holographic deception of this nature, if they endeavour to always be in the nowness of their real awareness, and not obscure their real awareness discernment by stepping out of it and sitting in the obscuring illusions of the personal self and its ideas. Duane the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Your Auntie Wendy's idea is that she's not interested in becoming more aware, so she is the image that's being used in this experience. That's why the guides took that form, to show you how this is being done. In other words, all of a sudden, it appears that this person is not interested, but as you see the performance going on, you recognize what's happening. You recognize what's going on. This is where we use our awareness instead of our minds, thoughts and assumptions, and we all do that, but more so the awareness. I always look for the intent of a person, no matter what they've done or who they are. I look for the intent. Will they step up and utilize that for a benefit? I've had to confront dark force individuals in the past, to where on the real side it can be Joni or Harry, it doesn't matter, but they have taken on my appearance and did certain things in the experience of other new friends, and those new friends left. And they would even post it on Facebook, how they saw Duane doing this and that on the real side. And to these people I said, does that make sense? It's not only the awareness, but looking at it with what makes sense. That's why there was the disguise in your experience, to show you how this is done, and we then share this with others. But for the most part, it's a real toughie and a challenge for most people to want to recognize what's going on. Most times People just want to rather believe differently, and there have been a few people like that too, to where they've asked ReBisar and received experiences about me, but they misinterpreted them. There's nothing I can do about that. I'm not here to be liked, but for us who are paying attention, yes, the dark forces have this technology to do anything. They build planets. They do whatever. We see them on the real side, with the experiences being shown. The faked universities they've built on the real side to fool people that supposedly are real universities, and they are not. It goes on, and yes, this is the age of the big wake-up. We've come through all this dastardly stuff. We've taken part in it, and so, to really wake up, you cannot take anything for granted, because then it's an illusion too. Again, we're all beings of light, and we decide to recognize that, or we stay comfortable with our relationships and all these little ideas that we've created here on Earth, etc. So it's a lot.
Yeah, regarding the holograms and the Operation Bluebeam and just all the technology, we don't really need it. It's almost like it's a huge brainwashing distraction tool the controllers use to get people to see things their way. But even like TV movies, although we use them as documentaries, we don't really need these things. But we utilize them since they're here and people are agreeing to them. But the Indians, again, they didn't use them. You didn't have TV. I mean, they're with the natural environment. They were doing things that were real, and they were having their own experiences. And in a way, we're borrowing these experiences from others when we see images on TV and movies. Again, they're not negated, but we don't really need them. So just a consideration you might look at, that how you're agreeing to this is a reality that just is. It's progression of, progress, but we don't, the way they're being used right now and utilized, it's for basically indoctrination, brainwashing, and different nefarious schemes, to maintain control. So it's just a consideration there. Jeremy, you have anything?
Yeah, I was just gonna pop in. I want to say it's also very important that when you come across these fakers, these masqueraders, whatever, to confront them, because they kind of can't answer anything you throw at them. They just kind of freeze up. Really know why they're doing it. Like they just don't know why they're doing it. It's funny. I confront them nowadays.
Continue on, please. Part 2.
In this real side experience, I had an objective, and that was to visit what seemed to be a refuge, a sanctuary for very gifted individuals. The main thrust of our assignments on the real side is to scour creation from one end to the other, to seek out every individual, every being, every body type that houses awareness, and to extend to them the opportunity of becoming more aware, and through that process to ultimately recognize their real awareness, and recognize the is through the real awareness that it is a part of. The personal self is basically a created consciousness of restriction and agreement to control, and that if an individual resides with the personal self only, if an individual retains their awareness with the created consciousness, they represent a continued, decided overall agreement to a restriction that affects not only limitation and restriction for themselves and their positioning in life, but the bigger picture is that they are adding to the demise of a simulator that the consciousness of all within effects, a simulator that is the consciousness, and based on the nature of the consciousness dictates the effects, as exhibited in the state of the simulator, a construction of a consciousness that comprises of restriction, of ideas that don't make sense with life, and supports the all-natural environment throughout all life levels and the awareness of all, then effects a simulator that deteriorates and ultimately implodes, impacts in on itself. So, for every individual that becomes more aware, that gradually lets go of a personal self, that is a simulator, deteriorating mechanism, is no longer contributing to this simulator demise, or contributing less and less as they proceed with their process of awareness, until standing real with their real awareness and only creating through the personal self that which makes sense and is beneficial, then the simulator situation can be offset by fractions and degrees. And so, as Dwayne says, every individual, every awareness is precious. So, not only are we seeking out individuals and extending them this opportunity to save themselves effectively and the simulator, but many places are established now on the real side and throughout creation where those potentials, those individuals preparing to step up also, or those on the process of awareness at the various stages they are at, are provided a safe haven to operate in, as of course when individuals do step up and decide to become more aware, at first they are more vulnerable, as the dark forces can make use of agreements through the personal self-consciousness, mostly the subconscious unseen agreements to control, that allows their inclusion and attacks into the physical and real side experiences of such individuals. And as the individuals become more aware, if they are not intimidated and frightened off by the dark forces, who make good use of this phase of vulnerability, as individuals recognize and stand more in their real awareness, through their real intent and real awareness, they become more capable, adept, better able to handle themselves, and can even switch at will from the personal self arena on the real side, where effects can take the form of dark force attack and infringement to the real awareness arena, where they stand beyond cause and effect, aside from creation, and so are removed from any entanglements, and are just a creational real awareness overview without involvement. For at this time, countless numbers of individuals are stepping up, primarily on the real side, with the possibility that the personal self then decides to proceed also on the physical, but with that there's no guarantee, and the dark forces are aware of this also, and shaken by the prospect of their enslaved cattle running amok and escaping the prison yards of creation. So recently I have seen and shared how the dark forces are targeting very heavily individuals on the real side who display anything of a potential flight risk from the controllers' clutches, and the dark forces have been seizing all they can and locking them down, often in hard-to-reach areas of the real side, but not hard to reach for the real awareness and the guides, as then rescue operations are initiated, and these I have been reporting and participating on also. And so, on this real side experience, it wasn't a case that I was to extend the opportunity of the All Is to the haven of gifted individuals I was to visit, as already they had begun their process of awareness. These individuals were a wide and varied assortment of aliens and body types, all assembled in one place, and for the purposes of protection, and for the reasons they required protection, I have just explained, they being in their vulnerable, rudimentary stages of their awareness processes. This refuge was under the keeping of the real guides, as was my impression, and of course, if agreements and ideas were embraced that allowed the dark forces to seize any of the individuals here, the guides couldn't violate what are free will decisions that this be so, although attacks on those becoming more aware carry a heavier karmic burden, and so, should the dark forces decide to take advantage of what are agreements that allow this to be, generally through the unseen personal self subconscious, then the dark forces have rather incurred a debt that the guides can use to deal and intercede on behalf of those the dark forces are attacking. For the dark forces have decided through their free will to be abrasive, and the effects of doing so for them will be adverse situations in equal measure, adverse situations that the guides can feature in and then intervene through, without then violating free will, as it was the choices of the dark forces that effected their unfavourable situation, that can be to the extent that they even get placed in the phantom zone. Again, nothing other than what they have earned for themselves, through their choices, So to be phantom zone imprisoned means they simply decided that for themselves. Anyway, these particular beings afforded a sanctitude, seemed a very tentative, nervous, and mistrusting group overall. Perhaps their lifetimes had resulted in a consciousness of this nature. As with most who risk take and step beyond the boundaries the controllers set, will receive their intimidation, tortures, and deaths at the hands of the dark forces. It seemed that various aware beings were approaching this group, but a softly approach, to attempt to have them agree to step up more so and become more aware as a result. After all, it was for their overall benefit. There was another individual who visited also. Interestingly, she was an individual who had been affiliated with an old spiritual path I had been associated with, the Template, and although all who had been involved with that were well-meaning and sincere, like Ekankar members, they were agreeing with nothing else than a restricting idea that would hold them to creation. Seems she had been made aware of this sanctuary, and was permitted entry, as she meant no ill will, but none of the beings that resided here would go anywhere near any individual that was affiliated with any spiritual, creationally based idea or religion. And indeed, an individual who I had the impression was a real guide would explain this to her, and she was denied access to these beings. She was disappointed, but accepted the situation and would depart. The guide didn't seem inclined to present her with the opportunity of the ears, but then perhaps he could see. He could read her consciousness, her intent. He could determine that she simply wasn't ready for it, that she would unlikely let her spiritual idea and affiliation go. Apparently, there was an especially unique being who was afforded refuge here, and although I would never see him, I had the impression of him. He looked somewhat like a grey alien, though very tall, and his skin of a golden colour, and a golden radiance exuded from him like a magnificent aura. I'm uncertain as to the extent of his awareness, but my impression was that this being could be extremely instrumental in the affairs of creation and the simulator, and that all these other assorted beings that resided here would follow his lead. And indeed, great swathes of individuals throughout creation and the real side would do likewise. Such was his range of influence. For rarely have I encountered the impression of such a sincere and genuine being outside of encounters with the guides, Dwayne and Ava. And as I said, it's not even that he may have been that aware, but his consciousness was so very pure. The idea was then, as I said, to try and encourage these beings, with the golden alien representing them, to step up further, and I'm sure the guides were continuously encouraging them. But the new friends too have the opportunity also to come to this refuge, as though to test perhaps our abilities to have individuals see sense, as we always are refining our sharing abilities and have the opportunities to do so. Or maybe also the real guides wanted to show me further verification of all the beings that are stepping up at the various stages that they are, and all the unique beings involved. And they wanted to draw my attention to this golden alien, that he might be very instrumental in what is to come, should he agree. I was shown a variety of pictures of the beings here, and indeed they were quite the assortment of body types, but alas, it seemed the beings here and the golden alien didn't want to engage with me. I was rather disappointed, as I delight in encountering all the various exotic life forms and body types on the real side, and my personal self deliberated over the considerations that maybe my focus and intent through the 5 bodies needed a little adjusting, a realigning, as we always are refining the personal self to better and better align with the real intent of the real awareness, and then to ensure that we don't utilize the personal self for anything other than is beneficial for what we need it for, as vehicles to present the ease, through the use of the faculties of it, the literal parts, etc. And perhaps it was so that further adjustments of the personal self needed addressing, or maybe I was just there to be shown this refuge, and my failure to encourage the beings to step up more so was due to the sensitive natures of their created personal consciousnesses. Nevertheless, a little girl would suddenly appear at my side. I had the impression of a tremendous sincerity and real ease standing with her, but couldn't identify her. Maybe she was a guide, maybe a very aware new friend, or even the ease representing itself in the form of a child, as it occasionally will. A child is a good representation of the purity of the true reality, and so this is how the ease occasionally reveals and expresses itself. She smiled up at me and took me by the hand, leading me away from the main building and along a footpath that eventually led to a balcony overlooking a beach area and a vast ocean beyond. She directed my attention to the scene below, and there I could see all the various beings that were taking refuge in this guide-protected place, some on the beach area, some in the water. She led me down to where these beings were, and although I could detect the apprehension of most of the beings, as I said, they were a very nervous group overall, it was as though that due to my being in the presence of the little girl, that they were reassured. So perhaps she was a guide that they recognized. Some of the beings defied explanation, so curious were they to my personal self. There were a number of rock or crystalline type body forms, as though they came from a place in creation where more silicon-based life was the normal, as opposed to the carbon-based life forms of the planet Earth. There were some huge beings that reminded me a little of elephants, that looked like the letter M, a central body and two heavy-set supporting limbs, and they would always move sideways. They had two additional mouths to their central one placed high up on each limb. At least I think that's what they were. Despite their size, they were the most afraid, and despite some of the forms being rather animal-like, all were beings that had reached a position in life where they were personal self-deciding, utilizing free will, etc. So these were not animal forms, as all here would have progressed through such forms long ago. There were a lot of aquatic-based beings, hence the necessity for the sea, some of them looking a little like mer creatures, but with webbed feet and limbs, and not fish tails. Also I saw what I have encountered before on the real side, a species of dolphin, but again with a body type that is a free will, self-deciding, personal self-vehicle. These dolphin beings seemed to be able to shift their forms from a dolphin to a sort of more bipedal hybrid that could walk on the land, but I would never see them do so here. And as I said, there were some beings that I just couldn't describe, but despite my not being able to meet the golden alien and have a chance to speak with these beings about stepping up further, I felt privileged to have at least seen them, and perhaps if I earn more their trust, I will encounter them again, and if this golden alien does step up fully, as I said, so influential is he, based on his purity and sincerity, for his sincerity was like that of a child in fact, then the dark forces who want to maintain control over their created matrix will have cause for concern. Duane the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Things are adding up constantly. We see how it is, and there is a lot to do. And the little girl, yes, very interesting. The innocence, purity, and sincerity of children is very exceptional and precious. It doesn't make sense for people to focus on their personal life. It goes nowhere. They have to actually step up and do something, and to recognize this reality, this preciousness that all life is, and to be with it, instead of staying with the personal self and all the silly things we did that got us here, it all being infected and diseased. That's just how it is, especially today.
That ending part was really interesting, that it's all infected, and you know, and that's how creation is. That's like the passing dream, that just because things are older, it's like people collect old things and they think they have value, but they don't. It's just a bunch of old stuff, outdated. Same goes for ideas and attitudes from all the lifetimes we live. These things, they become malignant. They start to transform and mutate into things, and then we get things like the callum and the influence and all these other aspects of the created consciousness. So it's interesting to see, especially because people, I remember hearing what Dwayne, the great writer, said. He said that people like being influenced. It's actually like a way of life. Everybody just influences each other. It's just a way of life here. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, Kevin, I was curious about the safe havens in these places. Are there anywhere similar to the rehab centers that I've heard about too, or how they related, if anything like that? Have you had any experience with those? The safe havens you mentioned in the experience where people that are ready to take the next step can go.
What are these rehab centers you're talking about?
Maybe I just made it up, but yeah, I've heard it. I've heard Dwayne talk about them, I think, about how, oh, I see. Yeah, instead of going to the phantom zone, those people that are not so far gone, they have a chance still to, turn around. So there's rehab centers for them. If they're really way wasted and to the point that you can't do anything with them, start all over, go to the phantom zone. If there's still a chance for them, rehab. It's like a drug rehab.
Well, that was interesting, because that's an experience I had the other night that I was going to share on the galactic thing, where I had the impression that all these reptilians were being contained in almost what looked like almost like a prison complex. And I had the impression it wasn't the phantom zone, but a step in that direction, almost as like though it was a final opportunity for these reptilians to change their mind, turn around their decisions and choices, and do that then which more benefits life and awareness, and decide to back and assist the guides rather than be in opposition to what they're doing. So to me, it was quite interesting, because the reptilians were reptilian controllers, but they were all in the form of crocodiles, and they were all contained, as I said, in what looked like a penitentiary. And there were guard towers, and within the towers were the real guides, and that's what the impression I had as to what that was. And I found that on the real side as well. I found that the reptilians who are stepping up more so, you tend to see those reptilians in bipedal, walking, talking lizard man form. But for those controllers who are still presenting as restriction and control, and are going along those decided lines with their consciousness and trying to sabotage and infect everybody else, their form tends to be more animalistic. So you tend to see the controlling reptilians as giant alligators or giant snakes. And that was very much represented in that experience in the penitentiary, where all these reptilians were in the form of crocodiles and put in this containment facility, and almost being given a last chance to change their mind and do something beneficial rather than detrimental to life and awareness.
Yeah.
But
In your experience, you're seeking out the different body types of those that were ready to take the next step. You could say it's kind of self-evident, I see, but can you talk about being in a different body type, how that works. I mean, how is that all the process? How does it work? You can see human, but if you're, I mean, does this imply to say cats or alien creatures with different bodies? What do they do? I mean, how does the process work in terms of different consciousnesses and different body types? Are there, again, maybe facilities or people that are dealing with it to help with the process?
Well, your body vehicle, and your position in life is always the effect of your consciousness. So according to how that is constructed, it dictates the body form you have. And so I think Dwayne described the reptilian as almost an awareness evolutionary backstep. So for individuals who are human body forms now, if they are making, poor life choices, then they are affecting into body types that are reptilian. And we see that on the real side with the Harry, Joni, the Ekankar members, various other people and the controllers. Although they have their human body forms now, on the real side, you always see them as the culmination of their decision. So you will see what they are projecting into based on how their consciousness currently stands. And that works the other way as well. The reptilians then, the reptilian form as an expression of very limited, old, outdated ideas, because their body form is very prehistoric, almost like locked in, almost like locked in place, and hasn't. Does reflect their very limited and abrasive and controlling, warlike and restricting consciousness. But as the individual then makes better life choices, so as you see people reptilian on the real side who are human now, it works the other way as well. You can see reptilians now who now are in the form of humans on the real side, but through your awareness discernment, you know that they are reptilians, but you're just seeing the culmination body form of what they are deciding now in the nowness through your real awareness, where you always see the culmination, the end product of the effect on the real side, aside from the cause and effect rollout of the simulation through the personal side on the physical level. And so that's how body forms move along. It just depends on the decision, which then affects the body type according to the consciousness and the decisions that people have made. And I can't remember, was there a question in there somewhere?
Well, also go on to, like, if you're evolving through, through a rock, through a plant, an animal, etc., can you like skip a grade? Or, if you got the incentive and awareness, you can skip. You see that happening? Like Kelsey, when she was in high school, but she kind of skipped her senior year, she went to college because she was just more aware and ready. You see that happening in the natural progress of procession of becoming more aware? Can you skip along quicker than others if you're ready?
It depends on the individual, what they decide. I mean, I think Dwayne said you go through the process as quickly as you decide to do so. And if there's any delaying in the process or through the body forms, it is simply the delays you have created for yourself based on how you have limited yourself and decided through your consciousness. And with these body forms like rocks and animals and such, I mean, they're not at a point where they have free will and are self-deciding. So they are directly animated through their real awareness. And so at that point, it is the real awareness moving its awareness through the body forms, and there's nothing in the consciousness of those body forms that is necessarily having much impact on the body forms that are being assumed. Although, like as we were discussing on other shows, there will be certain environmental factors and stressors that can affect the consciousness of the animal, even though it is directly animated by the real awareness. For example, the mistreating of an animal would have its take on certain considerations and emotions, which could then project into body types and situations in accordance with whether the emotional idea or that which has been implanted into its consciousness in response to what has externally affected it. Because I think Dwayne said when individuals first come into the simulator, they need some karma to kickstart their process, because you can't be in the simulator unless there is unless you can't be in the simulator unless you have created something that you can be the effect of. So it's like the real awareness gives individuals a certain karmic gift that then they can walk into the effect of. And personally, I think that I think the ears distributes, broadly speaking, this karmic gift that will take individuals along the lines of more the predator or more the prey, and those lines will then evolve into then the controllers and the suppressed. Because I can imagine that if a particular real awareness gave the gift of a sort of let's say a more aggressive type attitude idea, that then the effects would express with the body type that would come from such an attitude or idea, then that would have that awareness individual's body type going a more predatory lines. And I can imagine that then continuing to build upon itself, and then we would see perhaps the individual body type going through, all the predators that you can imagine, through the various forms into sort of like the snakes and the crocodiles, and eventually that form translates into that of the reptilian. And then on the other side of the coin, I can imagine individuals going through the more prey animal lines, which would eventually evolve into more the those who tend to be more the oppressed and the slaves in the simulators. So
where do you see self-awareness? Like animals, they're not really self-aware, they're just like instinctual. But humans are self-aware, like we have our personal self that we're aware of, and we're trying to see, get our real awareness lined up to our personal self. The real awareness is trying to line up the personal self so it can utilize the personal self to become more aware of itself. Where do you see like self-awareness coming in this process of evolution and you say the rocks are just kind of real awareness, or they're just real awareness. They're not self-aware, they're not instinctual, they're maybe just real aware. Real awareness is moving them along. But question is, how do you see self-awareness come into play? It comes into play in the humans, I see, but is that the only place? And maybe it's what I'm saying is self-awareness is just aware of the personal self, whereas animals aren't aware of the personal self, they're just instinctual. You have any comments, or Jeremy or Kevin?
Well, until the point where an individual does start making free will decisions, they cannot be then in a position where they can free will, where they can eventually build to a point where they can free will decide to recognize the is. Because if you didn't have an individual making free will decisions, it would just be directly animated by the real awareness, and it would just go through the body types, because the personal self, you need the personal self in order to be the comparison through that which it creates in order to recognize the is from. But there has to be a point when you decide to do that. And if you're operating directly from your real awareness, well, the real awareness doesn't operate from a position of free will deciding, and so nothing would actually occur. So you need to create a personal self that then uses free will to decide things, something like that. Anyway, so it's quite hard to explain, really.
Yeah. And Dwayne has talked about, otherwise you're just a real awareness floating around.
Yeah.
You're kind of useless in a way. You've got this position, but it creates the personal self to create agitation so it can see more, of itself, of its position, and decide what to do with itself in a way. Otherwise, it's just kind of, I don't know, he mentioned this, it's just there floating around, real awareness. And he doesn't have, it's a good position. I mean, there's a lot of beings like that, but it's the activity, that makes the agitation that you see more from. So that's why we're here.
I mean, the real awareness, just is, and it will not make what would be decisions that can only be made through a personal self, because it's only personal self that creates ideas and considerations and intents and wants and desires. And so unless it has a personal self that is doing that, then the real aware, then it would never get to a point where it has the opportunity to recognize the real awareness that it is. So
yeah,
there's a certain point, there's a certain body types that the real awareness moves itself through, that are in a position where they can start to self-decide.
Well, I know Jeremy can explain it in very simple terms. Jeremy, I know you can do that.
That I could explain it better. So the question was about awareness.
Well, I'm just curious, self-awareness, or compared to like an animal who's just using an instinct. It's not self-aware, it's just doing stuff. When you become human, yourself, you have this other side of you, So I guess that happens. Does that happen in the aliens too? I guess it happens in alien body types too.
I think that would, the way I see it, more so than I think, the way I see it is that would come along with free will. The free will to actually decide to do certain things that sort of define an individual, rather than just working off your instincts, sort of what you need, not really what you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That free will is, yeah. Dwayne calls it a bitch, but it's still, we need it. I mean, and then he talks about getting, like, you don't even have the free will anymore. It sounds like, oh, you're restricted, but no, without the free will, you have this position where you just seeing and being, but you have experience behind you, all these experiences to lead you up to, what's not real and what is real, and it gives you a bigger viewpoint somehow. But you don't have free will anymore. You're just seeing and being and doing, But the free will is more personal, maybe. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that was a video I had watched. It was I don't know if it went into the archive or it was just one that Kevin had re-uploaded, but it was talking about how free will is essentially a trap, because if all life is an isness, then there's nothing that you could decide individually to add to it, or to pick apart or see, because it all is. So if you're making a decision, you're deciding with your free will, then that has to be sort of confined to what it is. So that's only in creation. Very interesting.
Yeah, I know you could do it. See, you explained it good. All right. Okay, anything else here today? That was good. Okay, so let's sing the NUUU, which I encourage people to sing the NUUU before bed, 10 minutes before bed and throughout the day, just to see what happens. See what happens. See what life shows you. NUUU. Jeremy?
NUUU.
That'll be on the bloopers. Kevin? Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Jeremy. And thank you,
No
Miss.
That would be sister over there.
Sister, okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.